We're holding Hilchos Melicha, Siman Samach Tes. We were in the middle of Sif Daled in the Ramah as to how to go about doing the Melicha, the salting. How much salt, what kind of salt. And then we're going to go on to Sif Hey and Vov. How long should the salt be on the Rishonim have a whole discussion about the Melicha, if it should be on only one side or on both sides. So we mentioned the Rashba. The Rashba says that mitzvah min hamufcha, it's obviously ideal that one should cover the whole piece of meat, or in the case of a chicken, even the inside, everything should be done thoroughly. The question is b'di'evad. So the Rashba holds a b'di'evad. If you did one side, you did it well, and it's not nechal machmas molchoy, which is a term that he uses. In other words, it's salty enough, wherever you did salt it, that you cannot eat it, it's so salty, then that is sufficient. That is sufficient to draw out all the blood that is within the piece of meat. The Rosh says that you have to cover the entire piece, all around, until there's no spot left without melach. So we explained that the Beis Yosef holds that there's perhaps no machlekes between the Rashba and the Rosh, simply because what the Rosh is saying is that's the way it's done. You cover the whole piece. Ideally, lechatchila, that's the way it should be done. The question is, what happens if you didn't? So it could be that they both hold the same, that that's only a din in lechatchila, that the piece of meat should be covered well. But it could be that it just works, and it doesn't matter how thick the piece of meat is. It just works. Salting it, as long as it's enough salt, as long as it's the right salt, and as we will see, as long as it's the right amount of time, given enough salt, even though not every spot is covered, it should work. And as we see, the Shach and Taz also agree that if you covered it all around, even if there were some spots that have no salt, it's still good. It's not even a b'di'evet. It's fine. It's acceptable. You don't have to worry about every square millimeter. But the way the Rosh explains it means that that's the way Melicha is done. That you pretty much try to cover everything, and you cover it with a sufficient amount of salt. This is, of course, an important din because, it could happen that somebody did not do his job right. He did not know he forgot. He got a phone call in the middle of the Melicha, and he only did one side. And then the time comes, oh no, I never did the other side. So that's what we need to know, do you have to go back and do the other side? That was a big question, because there are shittas, Chachmi Ashkenaz amongst them, that they hold that not doing both sides is le'ikuva. Le'ikuva means that it's me'akev. In other words, it's a problem. You can't go ahead and cook this piece of meat the way it is. It's me'akev means that you're held back. You need to do it right. And if you look at the Ramah says, he actually holds like that. Me'ikar adin, that one side, b'di'evad, is not good. But he makes a distinction between a b'di'evad and a hefset meruba. Right? In a situation where it's already late, in a situation where it already has been cooked, I should say, not necessarily hefset meruba, because hefset meruba, what's a hefset meruba in this case? It's really more of it's already being cooked, which is it's a different kind of situation, shatat kind of a situation. It's being cooked, and what are you going to do now? It's cooked already. So this is not really a case of hefset meruba, but it's being cooked, and even if it's not a big hefset, so it's after the fact, then that's different. That would be different. But the Ramah holds that you just can't allow it to go just like that. Oh, you did it one side, that's fine. Let's go. Let's let it go. No, we don't let it go. Our minhag is to be machmer. The Taz is the one that said that the kavana was the hefset meruba, I believe. In other words, unless there's a big knee, I think it was the lashon of the Taz. Unless there's a hefset meruba situation. Yeah, go ahead.
So what do we sit it?
Yeah, we're going to get into that.
Okay.
I'm just doing a little bit of a review. Right. Yeah. Right. And then we, of course, added what the Pri Chodesh says, that as far as a chicken, if you only covered one side of the chicken, not the other, it's not considered that you did one side. Why? Because you have the whole cavity in between. So you can't say that doing literally one side will actually draw the blood on the other side. How could it? There's a cavity in between. When you're talking about a piece of meat, even though it's an inch thick, you do one side, we can technically claim that perhaps all the blood came out through the process of salting. But to have a chicken doing it on one side, I mean, if you did the whole side of the kid, the whole thing, all around the chicken, you just didn't do the inside, which you should have, that's different. But to do just one side of the chicken, not the other, that would be a problem. All right, so that's pretty much where we left off, and we briefly went into the Ramah, who mentions this additional detail about Yud Beis Shois, 12 hours. The shir of Yud Beis Shois is an interesting shir that is really mentioned on later on. It's mentioned in somewhat different circumstances, but he mentions it over here too. That 12 hours can make a difference. For what? So he says like this: even though it is true that one side is not enough, unless there's a big need, unless big need means that either maybe you don't have time or it was cooked. But he puts those two together. He says, "Im lo letzorach v'dafkan kvar nizbashel." So obviously, based on that, he is implying that if it's just a small piece of meat, he wouldn't allow it maybe. But if there's a tzorach or dafkan kvar nizbashel was already cooked, fine. Aval im lo nizbashel adayin, if the piece of meat over here has not been cooked yet, don't go ahead and cook it this way. So if it's within the 12 hours after you've salted, you began salting, go ahead and salt the other side that has not been salted yet, and then cook it. If it's after if it's after the 12 hours, then all you can do to it is tzli. It's roasted on the fire. The Nura.
Who said that? The other side? Was it
the Ramah. Yeah, the Ramah says it clearly. The Nura, what's the tzli going to do after 12 hours? The tzli will be more powerful than the melach. In this case, the Nura mishav shoiv, it will be able to draw out, the fire will be able to draw out any remaining blood. And the side that was nimlach, that was already salted, will not be bolea from the side shelo nimlach. In other words, the side that was already salted, and now you're salting it on the other side, it will also not be bolea. In other words, no, right, he's going back, right. So don't think that you're going to have a problem right now that you're salting. I'm instructing you to salt the other side, but wait a minute, isn't that going to cause a problem to the side that's already salted, took out its blood? What kind of a problem could be? Because as long as the piece of meat or pieces of meat are being salted together, then even though some of its blood is falling on others, we say al yedei de torid v'polat lo bola. There's a concept that as long as it's emitting the juice, the blood, during that time, it is busy, preoccupied, drawing out blood or tzir or whatever. It will not absorb during that time. So here you might say, the salt, this piece of meat on the other side, has already been salted. So there's no more keboilo kachpoltoi, in other words, perhaps, because it's not busy, emitting blood. So perhaps it would be an issue. So he says no. You won't have that problem.
And that is based on the opinion of the Gemara. Where did you take that from?
Yeah, we will see, because there's different opinions on how that is supposed to, how that really happens. Does it really mean that you just salted one side? Or does it mean that you're salting both sides at the same time?
Even the
side that was already salted before. That's the question over here. But we'll see the Rabbi Elyahu how he learns here, because otherwise you're right. What is he trying to say here? Why not? Why shouldn't it absorb? It could absorb. Now the Shach seems to be learning that what the Ramah says at the end is going together with the tzli. Okay, that's the way the Shach learned. The Nura mishav shoiv, ve'ein hatzad shenimlach kvar boileya, v'afilu boileya keboilo kach poltoi. Now, if you read the Ramah, he seems to be saying that. Why would he go back to what he said before, since he's now talking about tzli, right? The only reason that I was learning it a little bit different is because it appears from the language that he's no longer talking about tzli. He's saying ve'ein hatzad shenimlach kvar bolea mitzad shelo nimlach. Well, you know what? It could be either way, actually. Maybe it's just talking about the tzli. But either way, however you learn it, whatever the Ramah is talking about, either way you would have potentially the same problem. He says you don't have that problem, as the Shach says, when you're doing sleep, because Kebola Kach Polto, as it's, even though it may take it in back inside, it will draw it back out. Or if you learn the other way, that the tzad that is, now that you're resalting everything, as the Rabbi Elyahu learns, you are going to be you're going to be salting everything, then you're also going to have a Kebola Kach Polto situation. In other words, even if it does absorb, it will come out. So that's what he says, Eina tzad shenimlach kvar bolea mitzad shelo nimlach. That you may be salting now, or that you may be doing tzli, as the Shach says. That's why I say, it could be, he's saying this legabe both, and it doesn't really make a difference. Now, but you would have to say that he's talking, like Rabbi Elyahu, that he must be salting the whole piece, because if you don't salt the piece, the side that was already done, and you only salt the side that has not been done, then there should be such a concern. Unless you look like the Pri Megadim. The Pri Megadim says, I have an idea for you. Before we get to the Pri Megadim, let's just understand what is this 12 hours all about. 12 hours is the shear that's later on explained as the Zman Plitas Atzir. In other words, technically, this is the amount of time or duration that dam and tzir can come out of meat, a piece of meat, or up to 12 hours. We don't usually have the salt on this piece of meat for that long. We usually rinse it after an hour or so. But technically, this is how long this piece of meat can actually, what's the word, Ilan? Emit? I think there's a better word for it.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that.
This is the duration of the time that the meat actually exudes. How about that? Yeah?
I've never heard someone usually say that.
How about oozes? All right. Yeah. All right. Anyway, tzir and dam coming out, the duration for that is about up to 12 hours. So that is why, if you wonder where does the Ramah take it, he takes this from later on, and it's mentioned later on as well, that this is the time, there is such a concept of a duration of 12 hours where tzir is still coming out. So the Ramah here said, listen, if it's after 12 hours, you still have the possibility of tzli. Therefore, don't cook it. If it's within 12 hours, go ahead and salt what you haven't salted yet. What? Discharge. Okay, thank you. All right. Yeah.
It's up to 12 hours. Salt on it?
Yes. Yes, obviously. Yeah.
Because otherwise we'll rinse it.
Right. No, once you rinse it, you've interrupted the process. And we're going to get to that next. What happens if you did rinse it? So here, potentially, you realize your mistake, you didn't know or whatever, and you only did one side, you can do the other side, because as long as you have plitas dan v'tzir within the 12 hours, then so what? If you salt the other side now that hasn't been salted yet, the whole thing is being poilet dan and tzir anyway. We're gonna get to that.
Can you start the 12 hours again?
We're gonna get to that. What happens if you cut it in the middle or afterwards?
Expel is also.
Okay. Even though expel has a different kind of connotation. But, all right, I like discharge. So we have this advantage, and that is why it works. That as long as there's dam and tzir coming out, we don't have any worries of salting down the other side and being concerned that now this side is going to absorb. No, it's still discharging or emitting dam and tzir, so there's no problem. And if it did absorb, it's kebola kach polto. In other words, we're not concerned. So when you have a lot of pieces, I think it's brought down in the Mahari, when you have a lot of pieces being salted at the same time, we never have that concern of one's blood falling on the other one, because I did the toridu polet lobola. It is preoccupied discharging dam and tzir, so it can never absorb, even though someone else's blood is falling on it. But here it was this concern that it stopped, the tzir stopped coming out, and now you're going to be salting the other side. You don't have this ididatorit, and therefore it may absorb, unless you learn that there's such a thing as duration of 12 hours, which is what the Ramah, of course, mentions, and not everybody's in agreement with it. This is not across the board, as we're going to see. It's not something that everybody agrees with. And that is why there's a concern here. So the Ramah just goes into it, that in Ochinami we hold that one side is not enough, but there are times that you can still fix the problem within the 12-hour period. So the Pri Megadim had a question here. The Pri Megadim really says, you know what, I don't understand what is the concern about the other side perhaps being boilea. Just face it down. You're going to take this piece of meat, you're going to take the side that has not been salted yet, you're going to salt it, just face it down. In other words, don't put the side that's being salted on top, facing up. Face it down. So any of the blood will not, if anything, it will go down, it will not go up to the other half. It won't rise. So that's a interesting Pri Megadim. But not everybody likes it. Not everybody's in agreement. For some reason, everybody says, don't do that. That's not the Eitzah. In other words, to get away from the problem, from the potential problem of, maybe because they hold that Meliach Keroteach, it does rise at least a klipa. Maybe because of that. But so, even though the Pri Megadim makes that suggestion, and you can still do that when you salt, but salt the whole thing. So, anyway, that was his idea. Not all the Achronim agree with it. So what did we see? We see that the Ramah in Siman Ayin, actually, if you want to know exactly where he brings this Chav Dalet, where he brings the duration. In Siman Ayin, however, he mentions a totally different kind of duration. He says, you know what? I have some news to tell you. He says in Siman Ayin, you can be lenient up to 24 hours, not 12 hours. In a Hefsem Meruba situation. Yeah. Over there, he talks about Plitas Tzir. He's not really so much talking about the exact same scenario here. Over there, he's talking about, in Siman Ayin, the next Siman, about Plitas Tzir coming out up to 24 hours. And he says, if you have a real Hefsem Meruba, things were done the wrong way, you can be made until Chavdal Shois. Okay, if that's the case, that he mentions such a scenario, or such a possibility of 24 hours, the Shach and the Taz immediately grab onto that and says, okay, Ramas is here 12 hours, but wait a minute. Can't we apply what he says there to here too? There he talks about a potential duration of 24 hours. Can we apply it here to the scenario of having salted? Remember, here it's one scenario, there's a different scenario. Here it's the scenario is salted one side.
The 24 hours is, what is the case?
Yeah, well there's Plitas Tzir, the concept of Plitas Tzir, but it's a different kind of scenario. It's a whole, it's a whole long Ramah. It doesn't pay to get into it, but he does mention that Plitas Tzir there lasts for 24 hours. So the Ramah, so the Shach and Taz pretty much say, okay, let's borrow that, and perhaps we can apply it here too in a Hefsem Meruba situation. Why should it be any different? It's a similar concept. Just over here he salted one side. All right. So we're talking about here that the piece of meat has not been cooked yet. If in a place where it's a Hefsem Meruba, in other words, what's a Hefsem Meruba? I mean, you don't have the time. Maybe you did so many pieces. It's very hard. It's difficult to do it all over again. The Taz, very interesting, says, you know what? You know why you don't have the Hefsem Meruba here, the Taz says? Because you can do tzli. If you have another solution here, who gives you the permission to extend the duration to 24 hours, which Ramah says there is such a thing. But here you still have the ability to do tzli. Comes along the Shach says, what if the guy doesn't like tzli? You see, that's the machlekes. So the Shach says, if somebody does not like tzli, for him it's already a Hefsem Meruba. Yeah, he doesn't like tzli. And Shach says, perhaps you can be lenient if all he wants is to cook it. For him it's a Hefsem Meruba. From the Lashon of the Ramah, however, the Pri Megadim on this says that it's mashma more from the Ramah here, more like the Taz, that he's only going to be lenient if it's already cooked in a Hefsem Meruba situation. In other words, it doesn't say like prior to cooking that there's a possibility of a Hefsem Meruba. In other words, if you look, the Pri Megadim says if you analyze the language of the Ramah, it seems like he's only talking about after the fact, after it's been cooked. Now what? But before cooking, after Yud Beis Shoyos, go ahead and do tzli. So somehow, You don't have that leniency here. From the Taz is mashma that you don't have that leniency of hefsem meruba here of chaf dalet shows, only yud shows, exactly like the Ramah says. The chaf dalet shows apparently is somewhat a little bit different in a different kind of scenario. But here, the Taz says you can still do tzli, therefore it's not called a hefsem meruba. The Shach says that perhaps you still could do it. You could rely on that if it's a real hefsem meruba, you don't have to cook it. Okay, it's good to know that we have a machlokes in case anybody ever has to rely on it.
On the shach, you got for you, but then there's you have multiple pieces.
Yeah.
You're going to rely upon the 20, but only one of these is going to go to the person.
To do the whole thing now?
You do all of them, even though only one piece is going to.
Yeah.
Who doesn't?
So maybe you can put it aside,
You separate that out, or does it give you the hefset for it all?
Yeah. That's a good question. Sometimes, we talk shahut or something, once you say something is permissible, the whole thing is permissible. There is such a concept. But here, obviously, you want to be lenient. Perhaps you only want to be lenient in the least possible that you can, to apply to the whole thing, I don't know, it would be a problem. Because after all, we do have a Taz, and we do have a clear Ramah. Mikvaot says that the Taz is pretty much following the Ramah. So, I don't know if I would be so lenient here. Alright, but what's important right now, it's okay, we have the 12 hours line, division line. And we're within those 12 hours. How much should we salt? Should we salt both sides or just one side, the side that hasn't been done? So the Pri Megadim says it appears that one should be machmir that when you're going to salt the side that has not been done yet, you should do both. But he says it appears that you should do it that way. You should be machmir. But he says from looking at the poskim, it's mashma that you only have to do the side that was not done. In other words, it's not really mentioned in the poskim that is a prerequisite. That is the requirement. That the only way you can do it is if you do both sides. But Rabbi Akiva Eiger makes a good point. Rabbi Akiva Eiger says that you should be moleach both tzadim for the following reason. Interesting point, he says. Why are we doing this? He says we're doing it because we're concerned with the shittas that hold that melicha from one side is not enough. Now he says, why do those shittas hold that melicha from one side is not enough? It's not because they hold that melicha from one side only penetrates only to half a piece of meat. If that would be the case, then I can tell you, what, just go do the other half. When they say melicha from one side is not enough, what they meant was it does not have the koach. It's not powerful enough to extract all the blood. It just goes a little bit, it draws out maybe a little bit, but not too much. It does not have that much power. You therefore have to cover the entire meat from all the sides. Once you've salted the meat from all the sides, then the melach, the salt, covering all the sides, in conjunction with all the various angles and corners of the meat, that's when it has its full power of drawing out the blood. So it says to do the other side right now defeats the whole purpose. You're going to do the other side, it's also only going to work just a little bit. It's going to draw out just a little bit amount of blood. You want the whole other half, or you want whatever's left inside to come out, you got to do the whole piece of it. You have to give the salt the most power possible. And to apply salt just to one side, it won't do as much. Just like it did not do as much the first time around, it's not going to do as much the second time around. It's just going to come, a little bit is going to come out. Don't you want, we want all of it to come out. For that, you got to salt the whole piece of meat, all around. So he says, when you didn't do the other side and you're going to do it now, make sure you do the whole thing. Okay. The Taz, however, brings his father-in-law. His father-in-law has a shita, the Bach. Bach was the father-in-law of the Taz. And Bach says, it all depends. Discussing this situation, he brings down the Bach, that which we say that you can go ahead and salt the other side is on one condition. Forget about Yud Beis Shosh. We're talking about within Yud Beis Shosh. You never did hadacha after the salting. Yeah. Let's imagine a guy salted one side, rinsed it out, and somebody approached him, shkia. What'd you do? Oh, I salted it. But you only salted one side. Oh, no. And he already did hadacha. The Bach says on that it's no good. In other words, once you've done hadacha, what happens now? to the piece of meat, you have sealed the pores.
But the first hadacha did not seal the pores.
Right. No,
For
but
the salt.
yeah.
Why would this hadacha be any worse?
Yeah.
Or a second hadacha and then a melicha. And who said that it was not rinsed before there was a...
No. Maybe I didn't explain myself right. The pores that are sealed are the pores of the side that has been salted. Not the pores, not the side that has not been salted.
So what's the problem?
So if you resalt it, wouldn't have pores?
Oh, that's the problem. So he says now that we're going to resalt it, or we're going to salt one side, right? The other side is going to absorb.
It'll absorb because we sealed
And
the
bibolea,
pores.
because we sealed its pores. In other words, what did we say before? We said before that we're not so concerned if you salt one side because there's sear coming out. You haven't done hadacha yet. So it will be preoccupied. It will be kabbalah kach poltoi. You only did one side. You go ahead and do the other side. There's still sear coming out. Yud beis shoys. Remember, especially if you go with the yud beis shoys, no problem. It comes along the back and says, yeah, that is helpful. You have kabbalah kach poltoi. Even though you're doing the other side, it's going to come in here. I'm not concerned. It's going to come out again. But not if you seal those pores. Once you've done hadacha after you salted it, not hadacha before salting. Because hadacha before salting, you need it because you want to, whatever, remove dan ba'ain, or you want to soften the meat. That doesn't seal pores. There's something about pores being sealed after the melicha has been done to it. Now, it's going to absorb, and nothing's going to come out.
What about the principle? If now we're in a situation where it is going to allow the blood to reach the other side,
Right.
then it should, by the same principle of kabbalah kach also release.
Right. Therefore, the Taz says like this. I disagree with my father-in-law, he says. On condition, however, that you salt the whole piece, like Rabbi Elyahu Kin says. In other words, I do have that concern if you only do one side. In other words, the Taz seems to be saying that I would hold to salt the other side without salting the whole thing, like Rabbi Elyahu Kin says, if it wasn't for the hadacha.
It wasn't rinsed.
Exactly. That's the way I understood the Taz. The Taz is saying, I want you to do the whole thing if hadacha was done.
So that would be...
So, like you said, yes, it would still be kabbalah kach poltoi once you salt the whole piece, right? Now, why? Why is he choylek on him? Why does he just say, I don't agree? How could he? His father-in-law, he was a tremendous basic. He says because this concept that his father-in-law brings down that the pores are sealed, not everybody holds of that. In other words, he latched onto that, but there's no consensus about it that actually happens.
So you can take it back?
That's why. So therefore, exactly. But he says here we also have an additional advantage. So we have number one, there's no consensus about pores being sealed. Plus we have a tziruf. What's the tziruf? The shitas Rashba. What's the shitas Rashba? That salting one side is good enough. Therefore, since we have that shita we can rely on, and there's no consensus about pores being sealed, even if you did hadacha, I let you go ahead and resalt the whole thing. But do the whole thing, not just one side. So be careful, do the whole thing. And then you'll have kabbalah kach poltoi still on the other side.
So in other words, he uses the chumrah to himself be machmir that you should salt both.
Right. And I don't think it's understood that very much in the Taz that he says both sides. It's the Pri Megadim and the Chavas Das that say that according to the Taz he would require both. So I think it was the Pri Megadim that was more clear about what the Taz would require. Yeah, I think there was more the Pri Megadim and the Chavas Das because the Taz just says I have a question on my shver, in other words on my father-in-law. There's no consensus about that, and besides that, we have the Rashba, but right. So I think he leaves it more or less at that. But it's understood that he would require to be molech, at least in the case that there was a dacha, be molech the whole piece.
Now the Bach was only talking about the kippah.
Right, only about the case of a dacha. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So once you salt the whole piece, you have aided the torid upolet lo bola. As it's discharging, it will not be boileya. Or if you say it's still boileya, then kabbalah kach poltoi. Yeah. So that is what we have. In other words, we do have such a shear of chov dalet shoys, but eventually we'll get to it. That describes a different scenario. Apparently over here, we are limited, at least according to the Taz And the way the Pri Megadim understands it, to only 12 hours. Afterwards, you would have to do tzli. Unless it's a big hefsed meruba, it was already cooked, we can rely on the other shittas who hold fine. One side was done, that's fine. But the evet, that's not enough, according to the Ramah. Alright, we're going on to Sif Hey. Sif Hey and Sif Vav, small seifim in seifim. Let's say you already salted a piece. Acha shenim lecha chaticha. What if you, after you salted, im chotach mimeno, then you went ahead and cut it? So the Mechaber says, ein tzarich lachzor v'limloach makom hachetach. You don't have to go ahead and resalt the place where you cut the meat. Remember we spoke about the possibility of somebody cutting a piece of meat and having, of course, more blood come out and having to rinse it again. In other words, it represents a problem, cutting it. But what if you already salted the piece of meat? The Mechaber says, you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to resalt it. Would I think otherwise? So obviously, since we have this halacha, there must be a makor to it somewhere. What is the concern here? The makor, source of this halacha, is in Tshuvas Rashba. As he brings down over here. Over there it's mentioned like this. Tshuvas Rashba says that when you do melicha, you've accomplished extracting all the blood. You've accomplished it. So now that you cut, if you see anything red coming out, it's called mohel. It's not called dam. You will see. You will see. Even when you buy that piece of meat and take it home from the butcher, you'll see it's bloody. You see some red liquid. It's not blood. It's called mohel. Mohel is the juice coming out from the meat. That juice does not constitute blood. So therefore, he says, if you were to cut it, there's no problem. You don't have to be concerned about it. That's not dam, it's mohel. Now we have something interesting, which you may recall, Hilan. The Pri Megadim brings the Rambam, and he says like this: the Rambam, who the Mechaber himself mentions, Yutes, towards the end of the Siman, that the Rambam used to say, you have to be careful after you've done Melicha, don't immediately cook it. Why? Because Melicha does not take out 100% of the blood. There's still a little bit remaining inside. So how do I get rid of that blood? So the Rambam says you do something called chalita. Chalita means that you singe it. I don't know if that's the correct English word, but I'll describe it to you. You basically immerse it boiling hot water for a second or two, and what that does, it zaps. That's the word for English, perhaps. It zaps the little bit of blood that's inside. Well, it's not German. Yeah. It basically, now, I did see, besides this Rambam, there was someone else. If I can find it here.
So, in other words, when he starts through that process, it's sealed.
No. It somehow it dries up that blood. That it should not be a concern of porosh. When you cook that piece of meat, there's still a little bit there. It will not be considered dam sheporosh. It somehow that boiling does something to the blood.
And then from being porosh,
right?
Doesn't really remove the blood.
Doesn't really remove it.
Seals it in place.
It seals it in place, but it's more than seals it.
And
It like dries it.
And that's how, because they used to cook salted meat in the times of the bride.
Yeah.
They knew how to do it. I think that's probably how they did it.
Yeah.
Wage.
Eventually we'll learn it. It's a CQ test towards the end of the Siman. We'll talk about it. That he says there are some who say that that's what you should do. Not everybody agrees with that. So the Pri Megadim actually brings the Rambam here. He mentions it. That's why the Rambam makes this a requirement before you cook it. The Pri Megadim also here brings down the Shita Sara'ah. Yeah, I think this was the other one. It was possibly the whole, that the Melicha does not take out all of the blood, 100%. Nevertheless, you can still cook it. Why? Because the little bit of blood that remains in the meat will become nisyabesh, he says. It will dry up as soon as the fire warms up the meat. So the little bit that does remain is accounted for. So we see, based on this sheet, that it's even less of a concern. You don't have to singe it. You don't have to immerse it in boiling water. The cooking itself will take care of residues of blood remaining there. So whether you hold like the Rambam or the Ra'ah, it doesn't seem like it's going to be a major issue. Just that the Rambam requires, like you were saying, an additional step. Whereas the Ra'ah says the actual cooking will take care of the little bit of blood that's still remaining, because Melicha doesn't take out 100%. So what else? Don't I have to do something else? The Ra'ah says, no. As you're cooking it, the heat will dry it up. But the Rambam appears to be requiring an additional step. All right, we'll come to that later. Now, there's an interesting shach here that's important to learn, not to skip it, because this could happen. Because from the Chaber we saw that if you cut it after the Melicha, you don't have an issue. But what happens if you cut it as you're being moleach? 10 minutes into the salting, you cut the piece of meat. Oh, this is too big. Let me cut it into smaller pieces. Then the shach says, on that case, when it's in the midst of Melicha, you have to do hadacha to that part and go ahead and resalt it again. And the Ramah pretty much says the same thing later on in Sif Chaf, that if you were to cut it in the middle of the process of Melicha, it's the middle, it's not after, then you may still have that, then you would be required to do hadacha, like we've learned before, and resalt it all over again. Like he says, דווקא אחר שנמלכו החתיך הקרוי, הוא די צריך לחזור ולמלוך מקום החתך. אבל תוך שיעור מליחה צריך להדיחו שם היטב, לחזור למלכות. That's the lashon of the Rashach. Yeah.
When we talk about sinjita?
Yeah. Chalita is a process basically of a quick, very strong heat that shocks the meat.
They say here two is very described as either locking the blood into meat,
like you were saying,
or as solidifying it in its position in the process, so it becomes a solid, like saying. And then it doesn't.
So it could be either one.
Right. It's different.
I guess we have to use a microscope to see what really happens to it. But we know that that's what, like you were saying, they used to do this in the past, at least in this kind of a situation where to be 100% sure that everything is gone, even after the Melicha is taken care of, they would immerse it.
From the time of the Qihen,
they were not Bekiim in that, right? Yeah.
With heat,
how much time?
Immersion.
Right, yeah. In other words, at some point in time, they did know how to do it. In other words,
the Rambam doesn't rely on it, but requires it.
Interesting, yeah. Okay. So that was Sif Hey. In other words, after you finish the Melicha, you don't have to be worried if you go ahead and cut it, because anything that comes out is not blood. Even though we said the Arshit is the hold that there's still some blood, we hold basically that you don't have to worry about it as long as you've done the Melicha. Now, in Sif Vav, however, we want to know how long does the Melicha have to go last. That's going to make a big difference. Because we said, as the Shach points out, if you cut it in the middle of the process, there's still blood. So how long should the Melicha be for? That's what Sif Vav is all about. So before we read it inside, let me give you a little bit of background. The Gemara doesn't say how long Melicha is. The Shir of Melicha does not mention the Gemara. The Rishonim, Tosfos, Rosh, the Ramban, they bring down the Bahag. Bahag, all he says is that Shir Melicha is Keshir Tzliya. The same Shir of Tzliya, of roasting it to take out the blood. How do I know? Because I do know one thing, the Gemara does compare Meliach Keroseach and Keroseach that's Tzli. When the Gemara says Meliach is like Roseach, it has heat, and it's like the heat of Tzli. What I understand from that is that the same amount that it takes for Tzli to take out the blood, the same amount I need if I apply salt. But thank you very much, but how much is that time? In other words, all I know right now from the Bahag is that the Meliach Keroseach and Tzli, that's the Lashon Gemara, so we know that the two are pretty similar, but I still don't know the amount of time. So the Ramban himself brings down from the Geonim before him that the Shir of Tzli was Keshir Hiluch Mil, the amount of time it takes an individual to walk a mil. And Ilan, you know what a mil is?
18 minutes.
No,
in terms
of amas. Yeah. It comes out to approximately, I would say, a little over a kilometer. a little bit under a mile.
Mm-hmm. But in terms of amas, I think.
Yeah.
How many amas would
2,000 amas, if I recall correctly. Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Anyway.
except for, I thought a mil is
Right.
walking, and it's to walk.
It's less. A mile takes 20 minutes to walk, 18 to 20 minutes to walk. So that's why I'm saying it's closer to a mile than it is to a kilometer.
Right.
Because a mile is 1.6 kilometers. So it's in between the two, I figured it out. I think it's about 0.8 of a mile. Closer to a mile than it is to a kilometer. But anyway, the shear of a meal, as Ina pointed out, is 18 minutes. But is that a given? Not necessarily, as we will see. It's a big machlokas. But before we get to the machlokas, when we give a shear of melicha on a piece of meat, we see from the various poisim that loy plug. There's no chiluk between a big piece of meat or a small piece of meat. Whatever it is, it's going to be kasher meal.
Or so.
Yeah. Now, I said lo plug, but if you look at, there's a Goy's Ashri that says, no, it all depends on the size of the piece.
Okay.
And I'll think it is, according to him. You can't say, that's why I'm saying, it appears that the majority of poskim are saying that there's no plug. I mean, we don't see a difference, but he says there is. All right. The Rambam says the shear is kedei hilach mil. So does Rashi in the Sefer Orah brought down the Beis Yosef. So far we see several Rishonim talking about hilach mil. If you look at the Truma Sadeshan, however, the Truma Sadeshan doesn't say shear or mil. All he says is the oilam is noyeg. The world's custom is to leave the salt on the basar for an hour. Why? He says it could be they take it from the Gemara in Pesachim. There's a Gemara in Pesachim that says that the tzli of the Korban Pesach lasted about an hour. In other words, it was not more than an hour. So based on that, he's saying that the minig has become, and he's right about the minig, it has become for us to leave the salt on the piece of meat for 1 hour. And he said, halacha l'maisa, that's what you should be makbid on. Unless it's l'tzorach Shabbos, you're in a rush, you have a tremendous amount of guests, you're in a hurry, you can be lenient and you can rely on the shear of meal, which is less, as the Ramah says. So before we go into the details of what is a meal and how it's calculated, let's see the halacha inside. See, vav shir shehia bamelach, the time that the salt should be on the piece of meat, eno pachot, should not be less. So you see how the Mechaber is careful to say it's not less than hiluch mil. And how much do I hold hiluch mil is? The Mechaber. What is the mil? Shehu kedei shlishit sha'ab bekiruv. Approximately a third of an hour. Now, a third of an hour is 20 minutes, but he said bekiruv. Approximately. Close to 20 minutes. We said 18. But he doesn't say 18. He just says approximately a third of an hour. All right. The Ramah says on that, you can rely on this opinion b'di'evet. Or, if it's lichvod ochim, letzorach Shabbat, you have no more time. This is the very least. You should know without extraneous situations, a minhag lashhot b'melicha shi'ur sha'ah ve'en leshanot. The minhag is, as we mentioned earlier, the Truma Sadeshan, the minhag is 1 hour, and that's the way you should do it. So people, whoever is doing it, the company, the shlachthaus, the butcher, whoever is doing the melicha, that's what you should leave it for. 1 hour. He's in a rush, he can do it for less. How much less? Not less than 18, 20 minutes. Now, before we go into the calculation, just one important shach. The shach seems to be saying that this b'di'eved that the Ramah is talking about is only if it's cooked. He doesn't want to give us the chance of doing it less if you haven't cooked it yet. Only if you cooked it. He said, if it has not been cooked yet, and you only salted it a little bit, go ahead and go ahead and salt it again. Do it all over again. And wait the whole thing all over again, according to some. According to other opinions, perhaps all you have to wait is a few more minutes, but he says no. The main thing is, don't think that you can get away with it just like that. But the eved means only if it was already cooked. Otherwise, if you salt it for less, then but if you look at the Isser Veheta, the Darche Moshe, it's not mashma like that. It's mashma that if you really are in a great need, that's also been the eved. The Dogel Miravavo I saw brings down that the shach would not have objected if the Melicha was at least a half an hour. Because I guess he had an issue with the 18 minutes being maybe perhaps so lenient that's not good enough. But even the Shach would perhaps be masking that if you did it for a half an hour or so, close to half an hour, it would definitely be sufficient at the Evan. All right. We saw from the Mechaber that the Mechaber says the shir is about 18 minutes. How does he know that? How do we know what the shir of a meal is? So this whole sugya of how much the shir of a meal is the sugya in the Gemara of how much does a person walk during the day. How far does a person walk during the day? In that same Gemara discusses what is a day. And that's where you have a big additional machlokes between the poskim. Do you calculate a day from Netz until Shkia, or from Malois Shachar until Tzeitzak Kochavim? Famous machlokes. And we pretty much go with, depending on if it's for Shabbos or for other things, is daylight, 12 hours of daylight is daylight from Netz till Shkia. So when we divide the daylight, we're dividing 12 hours of between Netz and Shkia. For other purposes, of course, and I'm saying for other because there are other shitas and halachas that rely on the shita that holds that it's Alois HaShachar until Tzeitzak Kochavim. So I'm not going to get into all the halachas, but there are halachas that depend on that. But for what we need to know is pretty much daylight does, as the Gra holds, is calculated from Netz, sunrise, till Shkia. So if somehow you have to divide 12 hours, and the winter and the summer are different.
Sure.
You have what's called sha'ot zmaniyot. Yeah. So the sha'ot zmaniyot, which are called in English seasonal hours, right? You have a winter hour, which would be 55 to 58 minutes, depending on the latitude or where you are. Whereas a summer hour would be up to an hour and 12 minutes. Per sha'az manit of daylight, of daytime. Would be longer, yeah. Depending on where you are, latitude. The closer you are to the equator, the more it doesn't really vary as much. Yeah. And I don't think it's such a good idea to be in the summer in England.
Yeah.
Shabbos is very late, and it messes a lot of things up.
The British again.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
Norway.
Right.
They do
That's even
Havdalah
worse.
when they wake up.
That's right. Yeah. That's incredible. Havdalah when they wake up in the morning the next day. Yeah. So anyway, yeah. So the shir of meal is taken really from that Gemara and how you understand that Gemara. So this makor of Yudches of Shmonai Sedakot is actually the makor is a Trumas Adeshin. The Pri Chodosh and the Crazy Placey bring that according to the Rambam in Pirush HaMishnayos in Maseches Pesachim, he holds that a meal is 2/5 of an hour. So according to the Rambam, according to the Pirush HaMishnayos at least in the Rambam, 2/5 of an hour is how much? 24 minutes.
Yeah.
And the Achronim wrote that according to Rashi, in the same Gemara, it's mashma that it's about 22 and a half minutes. So this, of course, all depends on how you interpret the Gemara. But Lemaisa, the latter poskim, the Gra and the Chazanish, they hold that the Ikar, as far as the shir of a meal is concerned, is 18 minutes. So I said earlier half an hour, because in a half an hour you've covered the basis of, for sure you've covered 18, for sure you've covered 22, 24. You did Melicha for half an hour. It's not the hour that you were supposed to do it, but you for sure were Yotze. So Lechatchila we hold, like the Ramah says, the Ein Leshanos, that's the minig, is to do it for 1 hour. Lechatchila. Shir Shah. But if you didn't have the time, you needed to rush and cook some more meat, Shabbos or whatever, you could rely on the more lenient opinion, which is a shir of meal. How much is that meal? At the very, very least, 18 minutes. You want to say that the Mechaber means Bekir? That's 20 minutes. You want to be Yoitze everybody, even the Shach, according to Dalagu Mervava? 24 minutes or half an hour should do it. So in other words, if you're able to do that, it's obviously better. But this is a very important detail because, has all the blood come out or not? So the way the Gemara is understood, in other words, in the interpretation of a meal, that a meal comes out to be about 18-20 minutes or so, and as the Tumas Tradition points out, that is what we have as a shear for tzli, for the Geonim. In other words, that's what we've been told that the Geonim held as the shear for tzli, and Melicha is like tzli, so if it works for tzli, it works for Melicha as well. But that again is only a bit the evid. It seems to be that the minhag is, it's always been like that, is to do an hour. Even though according to the Mechaber, it's not clear what he holds. That's why I think he said intentionally, Eino pochus mikdehiluch mil. It's definitely not less than that. He left it open as to how much you want to put it. It's interesting. Why wouldn't he say that it's, why wouldn't he give a shear? But he's relying on the Rambam also, and the other Rishonim, and none of them, of course, quote a bigger shear. So it's not like he has to come up with a bigger shear here. He's therefore saying it's at least that. But our minhag is to do an hour. And it's good to know that if you have no possibility to wait that long, or if somebody made the mistake of making it less than that, then you could rely on it as long as it was at least 80 minutes. What happens if it was less? Of course, you would need to redo it all over again. Start from scratch. If you removed all the salt and remove it, clean it up, and start all over again. And that starting all over again will not ruin it. Right? You haven't cooked a piece of meat yet. You can still take out. You would still be able to take out, as we said before, whatever remains inside. We don't hold that, it's all of a sudden it stopped. No. You didn't do it enough, it's like did one side and didn't do the other. You can go ahead and do it all over, do both sides. So people who are still doing melicha should know that they shouldn't just cut corners. Do it right, leave it for an hour. If it was for 45, 50 minutes and somebody rinsed it out, go ahead, you don't have to do it all over again. But bechatchila, of course you should do it. Okay, maybe we can stop over here.